And we can see that with only 10% of labeled data, which roughly corresponds to 100 samples in our data set, the pre-trained model, fine-tuned, or even with frozen backbone, outperforms the model trained with 100% of labeled data.
I'm Linus, and together with my colleague Joëlle, I will present our work on self-supervised learning with remote sensing data and vision transformers today. This work was joined together by the two of us and with our advisors at the University of St.Gallen, Michael Mommad and Damien Bord. Now, before I get into the topic of today's seminar, I have a brief slide about our background. Joëlle and I are both PhD students at the AI/ML lab at the University of St.Gallen. That's in the east of Switzerland here. Our group works on different applied and fundamental areas of machine learning, but the focus of the two of us is on Earth observation and remote sensing. Here we try to leverage advances in deep learning to develop solutions mostly in the environmental and climate change mitigation area. So among other things, previous projects dealt with the estimation of air pollution, where we try to estimate NO2 levels across Europe using remote sensing data, or the quantification of power plant outputs like the power generated or CO2 emissions, also from satellite imagery. If you're interested in such topics, then also please feel free to reach out to us and to have a chat about it. Now let's move on to the topic of this presentation today. In this project, we wanted to investigate the utility of transformer models for Earth observation. This is motivated by the rapid adoption across different areas of machine learning. They first started to show great potential in natural language processing, and in this area, at the moment, they've also become the state of the art. Since then, they have also been used in computer vision, started with the so-called vision transform method that adapted transformers for image data. However, in computer vision, we saw that strong performance of vision transformers was generally only achieved and depending on large-scale datasets and supervised pre-training on millions of images. Since such large labeled datasets are hard to come by in remote sensing and many other interesting domains as well, we wanted to utilize unsupervised pre-training for vision transformers in remote sensing. There is also a precedent for this because unsupervised pre-training has also been used extensively with transformers in the NLP area. So the setup in our work was thus to pre-train vision transformer encoders with large amounts of unlabeled data in a self-supervised way, which you can see on the left side of this figure here on the slide. And then to fine-tune the models based on smaller amounts of labeled data for the actual tasks of interest. Now today we won't go into the technical details of transform models, but I would like to outline some of the related work and how it also feeds into our approach. Fundamental to the transformer is the attention mechanism. This allows individual tokens of the input data to interact with each other and was proposed in this well-known paper from 2017 from Vaswani et al. As mentioned before, this work was initially geared towards applications in NLP, where attention-based encoder-decoder architectures soon start to replace RNN-based approaches. In computer vision, the vision transform paper from 2020 showed that the vanilla attention approach can also yield strong results when small image patches are used as tokens. So instead of tokenizing a sentence into words or sub-elements of words, the images are split up into individual tokens, as can be seen in the bottom figure here. But now as each token needs to interact with each other token from the sequence, or in our case from the image, this requires a quadratic runtime in the number of tokens. A number of different follow-up works try to improve this bottleneck of transformers. And in our work, we utilize the Swin transformer architecture, which reduces the complexity by only computing attention within smaller windows of patches, rather than across the entire image. There have also been several works in transformers, with transformers in remote sensing domain, which I'd like to mention. They were applied for different applications ranging from time series classification to change detection or segmentation. So as you can see, these transform-based architectures slowly also started to replace convolutional models in the vision domain. Now, we use self-supervised learning for pre-training of transform models, and this allows us to leverage the large unlabeled archives of satellite imagery that are freely available. In general, the idea of self-supervised learning is to construct a supervision signal artificially from the data samples themselves. There exist approaches based on specific tasks, like rotation prediction or colorization of grayscale images, and a more general class of methods called contrastive self-supervised learning. Here, the objective from a high level is to structure the latent space according to similarities between samples, which are known from auxiliary information. In the coming slides, I'll go into more detail on these approaches. In pretext-based self-supervised learning, a task is formulated from the unlabeled image to train a model. For example, parts of the input can be randomly included, and the model is then tasked to predict the missing piece. The solution or the target is known because it is simply part of the original input image. Similarly, the objective could be to predict the degree to which an image has been rotated, or the relative positioning of randomly arranged image patches with each other. Similarly, given a data set of color images, we can artificially grayscale them and then use the color burden as a target in a colorization pretext task. These are just some examples of the many tasks that have been proposed for self-supervised learning. Now, what is interesting is that empirically, we find that transferring models that have been pre-trained on such tasks to related downstream tasks yields a benefit there. So even though these tasks like rotation prediction or colorization might not be very similar to the actual task of interest, it seems to help a lot to first train on such tasks. Contrastive learning, on the other hand, is not based on explicit tasks, but derives from the idea of extending the supervised classification to the limit where each input sample is seen as a prototype for its own class. Hence, the target is to sort each image into its own bucket, so to say. To make this problem non-trivial, positive samples, which are usually transformed versions of each original sample, are created with strong random augmentations. The images are passed through a shared encoder network, and after training, the latent representations of the views of the same instance should be similar to each other, but dissimilar to views of other samples. You can see this on the figure on the right here on the slide. One of the widely used methods utilizing this principle is called SimCLR, and it follows exactly this schema in the figure here. Starting from a seed image X, here at the bottom of the figure, two random augmentations are sampled and applied to the image. The resulting views are then mapped to latent space by a shared encoder, which is called F here in the figure. The resulting representations are then again projected with a multilayer perceptron, after which a loss function that penalizes the similarity between views of different instances and encourages the similarity between them is applied. By using very large batch sizes, this method reaches strong results in image representation learning that even rivals supervised approaches. Here we see the performance in linear evaluation and fine-tuning setup across different datasets. In linear evaluation, the encoder network is fixed after self-supervised pre-training, and only a linear classifier is trained on top. For fine-tuning, the model is initialized with the parameters from the pre-training step, and then all parameters are trained on the supervised dataset. To adapt this approach to remote sensing data, we revisited the key step in this contrastive learning pipeline, the sample view generation through random augmentations. Here you can see some samples from ImageNet. Both columns are based on the same 3 seed images, and augmentations like random cropping, blur, or color shifts have been applied. The contrastive learning technique depends on multiple views from each sample image, but such data is generally not easily available. It's simply not possible to collect a second image from a slightly different angle for each object in ImageNet, for example. Therefore, the use of random augmentations here. Given a batch of such image pairs, the model essentially has to learn which views correspond to the same original image. A side effect of this is that the model becomes invariant to these transformations. However, in domains like biomedical imaging or remote sensing, it is more difficult to come up with random augmentations that leave the image semantics intact. But there are different aspects of those domains that can be exploited in this step. In biomedical imaging, for example, multiple views of the same patient might be available. Here's an example of an approach which proposed to use scans of the same individual that have been created with different imaging devices. This forces the model to learn the corresponding features across modalities in an unsupervised way. It requires only the information of which scans correspond to which patient across the devices. Instead of augmenting the images, as we can see here on the left, we simply take images of the same objects taken by different devices. And now, given that many satellites are up in space and continually make observations of overlapping areas on the ground, we wanted to adapt this multimodal approach to remote sensing data. Multimodal data from different instruments is also available here, but instead of objects or individuals, we chose to match the modalities across different locations on Earth. To that end, we used the SEN12MS dataset that contains co-located images from the ESA Copernicus Sentinel-1 and Sentinel-2 satellites. Sentinel-1 provides radar imagery, while Sentinel-2 takes multispectral optical images. This is illustrated here by the image on the right. For each location, we use 2-band synthetic aperture radar data from Sentinel-1 and the 13-band multispectral data from Sentinel-2. The images are then cropped in a pipeline such that the exact overlap is small and then fed through our transformer-based pipeline. After the self-supervised pre-training with SEN12MS, we transfer the trained model to land cover classification and segmentation downstream task. To that end, we used the dataset created for the IEEE GRSS Data Fusion contest in 2020, which provides about 5,000 Sentinel-1-2 image pairs with corresponding pixel-wise land cover annotations. Joëlle will now go into more detail on the models that we used and the training procedure, and also showcase the results, where we compare convolutional networks with vision transformers and showcase the benefits of self-supervised pre-training with this type of data.
So now regarding our method, it consists of a two-step approach. So the first one is the self-supervised pre-training. So we have this task-agnostic backbone that is composed of two streams of Swin transformer encoders, one for each modality. So we have one stream to encode Sentinel-1 images and one stream to encode Sentinel-2 images. So we encode these two inputs with distinct encoders using Swin transformer blocks. And now, for those of you who are not very familiar with Swin transformers, I just added this slide to highlight the main difference between a Swin transformer, so the one that we're using, and a classic transformer, for example, the vision transformer. So the two main differences are the hierarchical feature maps and the shifted window approach. Regarding the hierarchical feature maps, it just means that the spatial dimension of the feature maps is reduced, so downsampled from one layer to another. And this is very similar to what a ResNet model would do if you think about it. So, of course, in a ResNet, they use convolution. Here, they don't use any convolution for the downsampling, but they kind of mimic this downsampling by merging patches at each layer. They have this patch merging block before each Swin transformer block. So it's interesting actually to note that these hierarchical feature maps are actually very useful for many dense prediction tasks such as segmentation or detection. Now, the second novelty introduced is the shifted window approach. The standard self-attention used in the vision transformer ViT performs global self-attention, which means that the attention is computed between each patch and all of the others. And you can see easily that this results in a quadratic complexity with respect to the number of patches and making it very computationally expensive for high-resolution images. Now, with the shifted window approach, the Swin transformers computes the attention only within the group of patches that are called here a window. And also to introduce cross-window connections, the Swin transformers shift the windows, allowing for overlapping patches. So this is the two main difference between the Swin transformer and the ViT. Now, so the last slide was regarding the architecture of the backbone that we are using. Now, as mentioned earlier, we trained this backbone using a contrastive loss on the projected representations R1 and R2 that you can see here, using the loss that is also mentioned here between R1 and R2. By doing this, we wish to attract representation of satellite images of Sentinel-1 and Sentinel-2 of the same location and contrast or repel representation of satellite images of different location. Actually, what is cool here is that by just taking advantage of the multimodality nature of the data that we are dealing with, we can construct these positive negative pairs without any augmentation involved. And what we wish to accomplish by doing this is that actually we hope to learn a very robust representation of satellite images that would be useful for different types of tasks. So from the very high level tasks such as image classification, single or multi-label, to the very dense ones such as segmentation. So the first step that we saw was the self-supervised pre-training of the backbone. The second step is the fine-tuning on two downstream tasks. So we use the task-agnostic pre-trained backbone, and we append a task head at the end of the backbone. And we train this task head in a very classic supervised way. So we propose to do this on two different tasks, as mentioned earlier. So the first one is the image classification task, which is a high-level task. And the second one would be a segmentation task, which is a more detailed task, so a very dense one. Now, regarding the classification head, so it consists of a fully connected layer. It takes as input the concatenation of the two representations of each encoder stream. And then once the two representations are concatenated, the Z1 and the Z2, we use a linear classifier, so just consisting of a fully connected layer. So this was regarding the classification task. Now, the second task is the segmentation one. So it's a bit more complex compared to the classification one. It consists of the decoder part of the backbone encoder. Of course, we could have had a much simpler head, and we actually tried it to just have a convolution, for example, or just an upsampling layer. But as you may know, if you're familiar with segmentation, state-of-the-art segmentation models usually have this U-net-like shape with an encoder and decoder and some skip connections between them, which we try to mimic here using the Swin U-net architecture. So this was it regarding our method. Now we conducted a bunch of experiments where we tried to validate different parts of our work. So we compared our approach with a fully supervised version to validate the need of self-supervised pre-training. And we compare also the Swin transformer backbone with other backbones, such as the ResNet or a UNet, to see if actually it's much more interesting to use or not. So I'm not going to bore you with all these numbers, that's for sure, but I will just highlight the most important ones. So the two results here highlighted are the ones from the pre-trained ResNet 50 and the Swin transformer backbones for the classification task. So in this case, both backbones are frozen, and we only train the last linear classifier layer. And you can see, looking at these results, that I mean both are very similar. So there's not much difference between this ResNet or the Swin transformer regarding the classification task when both are pre-trained in the same way. Now, if you compare these two numbers, here they validate the importance of pre-training a model. So we compare the values when the backbone is trained from scratch. So this is the value on the left. And when the backbone is pre-trained in a self-supervised way, this is the value on the right. And if you compare these two numbers, I mean, we can say that there's a clear advantage of pre-training the backbone and utilizing more efficiently the label data available. So these were the results for the classification downstream task. Regarding the segmentation, we also performed similar experiments, same thing. I'm not going to bore you with all of these numbers, but here, if we just focus on these two numbers, we compared two different backbones. So a UNet backbone and a Swin UNet. And both are trained from scratch in this case. And you can see that the Swin UNet seems to perform a bit better than the UNet in terms of mean IOU, but the UNet performs better in terms of average pixel accuracy. So it's also kind of the same thing that we saw in the classification task regarding training from scratch. Here we compare the pre-trained backbone versus the backbone trained from scratch, and we observe also luckily the same behavior as for the classification task, whereas pre-training the backbone clearly helps in terms of pixel accuracies and in terms of mean IOU, so intersection over union. We also show qualitative results comparing the ground truth with the UNet trained from scratch. So this is the ground truth on the left, then the UNet trained from scratch next to it, then the Swin UNet trained from scratch, then the Swin UNet pre-trained in a self-supervised way, and then an ensemble of both a UNet and a Swin UNet. And we can see actually that visually, the Swin UNet yields more details in the mask, while the UNet gives smoother output. So just visually speaking, an ensemble of both seemed to be a good compromise, and this is why we added it here, like the best of both models. Now, this is the one other experiment that we conducted, and I think, in my opinion, this is one of the most interesting ones. Here we study the impact of the size of the label dataset needed for the fine-tuning step on the task performance for both tasks. So we did it for the classification and the segmentation, but let's focus first on the classification task, so the one on the left. And let's focus more precisely on the orange, the blue, and the purple curves. So the three curves here show the evolution of the accuracy with respect to the evolution of the percentage of label data used for the training. The orange curve corresponds to the Swin backbone trained from scratch. The blue one corresponds to the Swin backbone pre-trained and then fine-tuned, and the purple one corresponds to the Swin backbone pre-trained, and then frozen, where the only last layer is trained. And we can see that with only 10% of label data, which roughly corresponds to 100 samples in our data set, the pre-trained model fine-tuned or even with frozen backbone outperforms the model trained with 100% of label data. So the full label data is around 1,000 samples. So what is very, very cool here is that we managed in this way to reduce the need of expensive labels by 90% using our proposed self-supervised pre-training technique. And we can see the same behavior in the segmentation experiment on the right. The green curve corresponds to the Swin UNet trained from scratch. The other two correspond to the pre-trained Swin UNet, so one fine-tuned and one with a frozen backbone. And here, with only 20% of label data, the pre-trained model outperforms the model trained from scratch on 100% of label data. So yeah, this was it. To summarize our work, first most important point is that we show that contrastive self-supervised learning yields rich task-agnostic representations that can be used as well for high-level tasks, such as a single or multi-label classification, and for dense prediction tasks, such as segmentation. We also showed that the self-supervised pre-trained transformers and convolutional networks are on par for land cover classification, and that self-supervised pre-training outperforms fully supervised approaches with 10 to 20% of label data, which is very important, especially in remote sensing where unlabeled data is widely available, but labeled data is much more expensive to get.